Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining me. We're going to talk about another very important, possibly the most important topic when it comes to the question of Islam. And I have two great guests with me as well who can speak very deeply on this topic. And the topic, of course, is apostasy in Islam. So why am I saying that this is one of the most, if not the most important topic in Islam? Well, what is apostasy? Apostasy is when someone, in this case, a Muslim, leaves Islam, abandons Islam, most usually by embracing another religion, and that religion most often is Christianity. You don't hear many apostates who become Hindus or Jews or Buddhists, but you do see a lot who become Christians, and that's no doubt due to the missionary aspect of Christianity, just like Islam has a missionary aspect as well, unlike other religions. So, the word itself, if we want to get into the linguistics in Arabic, it's ridda, and is the action or the deed itself of an apostasy, apostatizing, and a murted is someone who engages in apostasy. Now, the why. Right before we get into it, it's important to quote, because as I always say, I'm not here to ask you to believe me. I'm not the learned sheikh, but I am going to quote to you and show you what the learned sheikhs of Islam do say. So in that context, let's look at what, let me pull it up, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. I think he was named one of the most influential, if not the most influential, Muslim cleric of the 20th century, because he was born, I think, in 1920 or 19 in the 1920s. I think late 20s, and he died, I think, 2022. So a very, very long life, very influential. And so let's see what he said about apostasy before we proceed. And he said, here it is. So let me read it to you if you can't see it. So this is actually from a video, and I watched him during this video. He used to have his own show on Al Jazeera, which I used to watch frequently in Arabic. I think it was called Sharia and the Life, Al-Sharia wal-Haya, something like that. I may be wrong, but it was a very popular show, and he talked about all sorts of things. And so here's what he said about apostasy. And like I said, this was on a video, and of course, as you can see here, the video is no longer available because any damning evidence is always taken down. I'm sure if I look hard enough, I can find it in just purely Arabic websites. But it's well acknowledged and recognized and documented because millions of people watched him. And so let me read to you. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, yeah, it was on an Al Jazeera. Yeah, here it is, Sharia and Life show. Okay, he had this show, and he said, now here's what they say. Qaradawi is the world's most quoted independent Islamic jurist, and Al Jazeera's Sharia and Life show has an estimated audience of 60 million viewers worldwide. Below is the video, followed by the English transcript, and of course the video is now gone. But now here's the quote, which he did say. Let me read it to you. Quote, if they had gotten rid of the apostasy punishment, Islam would not exist today. Islam would have ended since the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So opposing apostasy is what kept Islam to this day. Surah Al-Ma'idah, or Quran 533, Surah Al-Ma'idah says, quote, the punishment of those who wage war against Allah and his apostle is that they should be murdered or crucified. And then he continues, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi continues, quote, according to Abi Kulaba's narration, this verse means the apostates. And many hadiths, not only one or two, but many, narrated by a number of Muhammad's companions, state that any apostate should be killed. In Abbas's hadith, quote, kill whomever changes his faith from Islam. In Mas'ud hadith, quote, kill these three criminals, the adulterer, the murderer, and the apostate that leaves our community. Then he continues, that is in addition to a big number of other narrations by other companions about apostasy. Okay, so there you have it. That is what one of the most learned sheikhs of the 20th century, who died just a couple of years ago, had to say about apostasy. Right? So what does he mean that without this law, apostasy would have would Islam would have died in its cradle? Well, right from the get go, after Muhammad died in 632, you had basically all these Muslims who had signed on to Islam one way or the other in the Arabian Peninsula. A large chunk of them basically thought the jig was up and we can move on with our lives. And they tried to break away from the new ummah, the new community. But Muhammad's successor, his father-in-law, essentially, little Aisha's father, Abu Bakr, he became the first successor, the first caliph. That's what the word means. And he waged what is known in history, in Islamic history, as Hurub al-Ridda. Ridda, again, Ridda, in the wars of apostasy, or the apostasy wars. And these were extremely graphic and bloody. And one of the heroes of them, of course, was Khalid bin al-Walid, the sword of Allah, who's also famous for later wars, which is like the Battle of Yarmouk and the conquest of Persia. But anyway, so this war went on very bloody, and these apostates had to come back into Islam. And bear in mind, many of them actually were considered apostates, not because they said, all right, we're going to stop prayers or we're not going to believe Islam anymore, but because they wouldn't pay zakat, money, money to the caliphate, to the treasury. That was enough to call them apostates and to wage war and to kill them. Okay. Now, so in its actual origin, and this is one of the things that Yusuf al-Qaradawi is referring to, in its actual origin and its birth, you needed to keep people in Islam. Today, well, what is apostasy? Apostasy is, first you have to understand, Muslims are born into it. There's no baptismal ceremony. There's no, even the shahada, where this is how you become a Muslim, where you say there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and you're supposed to say this in front of two Muslim witnesses, and you become a Muslim, okay? But most Muslims, the vast majority who are born into Islam, are just Muslims because their father is a Muslim. If your father is a Muslim, by default, you're a Muslim. You don't have to say the Shahada, which means if you're born to a Muslim father and you want to leave Islam, you're an apostate, and war must be waged against you, and you are to be executed and killed, etc., etc. Okay? Now, so you can see how not only was this law pivotal to helping Islam continue to exist following the death of Muhammad, with the Ridda Wars, but you can see how it continues till this very day. Okay, so we hear there's almost 2 billion Muslims in the world. Okay, it's very hard to determine who's the true believer, who's not, and I'm sure a great many of them are not, or moderates, as we would call them. Okay, but they can't leave. They have to be part of the ummah. They have to give lip service to it. And then if you really look at it, all the mechanisms of Islam are about growing it in numbers. So we have the apostasy, but then the other aspect, which we know, of course, is dhimmis. So Christians and Jews and the people who got conquered were given the option of, you can pay tribute, right? Jizya, and you can live under Islamic suzerainty and embrace second-class citizen and deal with sporadic persecution depending on which caliph, or mob uprisings, and this goes on till this very day, literally all around the Islamic world. And if you can put up with all that and you pay, and the money is essentially extortion, and accept living under these extreme conditions of inequality, okay. Well, guess what? Most people are not saints. Most people throughout history who lived on the lands that Islam conquered, and most of it was Christian, after a while, they weren't going to keep spending money, and they weren't going to keep being second-class citizens. And they figured, you know what? How about just say the words, and I be part of this ummah, and I get equal rights amongst Muslims, and I'm treated better than the infidel. I don't have to pay this extra tributes business. So, as you can see, Islam has all these mechanisms that are meant to keep it alive and growing. So you have the historic reason why most people ended up converting, because they didn't want to be extorted money and abused for the rest of their lives. They're not saints. They're not the greatest believers, most people. And so they became Muslim. And then after that, their children, well, they're stuck. They can't get out. You're born to a Muslim father. That's the end of it. You have to stay within Islam and perpetuate it. Okay. Now, another aspect which we'll look into when I bring my guests in more detail is, the punishment which is execution. Okay, so in Sunni Islam, and Shia is the same, but I usually speak about Sunni because it's the overwhelming majority. Something like 90% of Muslims are Sunnis. And if you look at Sunni Islam, you have essentially four acknowledged schools of jurisprudence, schools of law, Sharia schools. Okay, madhahib they're called, and all four of them have consensus. Usually, they might disagree about something minor or some nuance, and in fact, in this, there is one minor thing. So the minor thing is all four agree that the male apostate should be executed. I think the Hanafis, and we'll talk a little more about the Hanafis because they came up recently, actually, at the Oxford Union debate. I believe what they do is they also prescribe the death penalty for the man, but for a woman, for she shouldn't be executed. She should just be trapped and maybe starved and occasionally physically abused until she sees the error of her ways and comes back into the fold. Okay, so this is the reality. This is what we know. Muhammad famously said in what's considered a canonical hadith, whoever leaves his religion, by which they mean Islam, kill him. This is in Sahih Bukhari. Sahih Bukhari is canonical, as is Muslim, Sahih Muslim. And it's in the same one too. But there's, as I said in the Qaradawi quote, there's actually a lot of different quotes. And in fact, a lot of it's popular to say that it's only in the hadith. Not that that matters because the hadith is the twin pillar of Islam next to the Quran, but and the saying is that it's not in the Quran, that only in the Quran there's just spiritual punishments, hell for apostates. In fact, and Qaradawi is one of them. He stressed numerous Quran verses. I read to you one about the punishment for those who wage war, is crucifixion. And he said, amongst some of the jurists and the tafsirs, the exegetes of Islam, that mean those who wage war means the murtad, the apostate. And another important point: why are they? How are you waging war? Okay, you're waging war because by virtue of the fact of if you okay. So here's a small nuance that even Yusuf al-Qaradawi, I recall, he made. So he said, of course, absolutely, if you're an apostate and you're open and public about it, and you've embraced another religion, there's nothing for you but execution. But he did say, if you're quiet and it's just a loss of faith in your heart and you're not challenging the ummah and you're not creating fitna, you're not creating doubt and chaos amongst the Muslim community, which you would if one day you woke up and said, I don't believe in all this Muhammad business, or, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm Islam's historic enemy's faith now. All of that is translated and seen as waging war on Islam. So this is why some sneaky apologists will tell you, no, apostates aren't supposed to kill. It's just those who wage war. It doesn't mean, they get into a tank and try to invade Muslim countries. No, waging war literally is what I just described. Just by virtue of the fact of being an open apostate, okay, that is waging war. Speaking blasphemy. So for a non-Muslim to just speak against Islam publicly, that's waging war, and that's why blasphemy can get you killed. Okay, so I will now. I'm actually going to play a clip now, real quick, and then I'm going to bring on our guests. I know we have two of them. One of them might just be in audio, and they are, by the way, lest there be too much suspense here, Nissar Hussain, who is I think Kashmiri, Pakistani background, born and raised in the UK. And I did a video with him. You should see it if you haven't. Very long, comprehensive video when we met in Washington, D.C. a few months ago. And he told us his life, his journey, essentially, and what happened to him as an apostate in England, no less. And he'll come back, summarize that for us, but he'll also engage in this overall debate or overall didactic, essentially, session on the meaning and significance of apostasy. And we also have a Neil Petrie, of Legalize Apostasy, which is an organization also in Britain that works to help Muslims who want to be rid of Islam and want to want to apostatize from Islam, such as Nissar. But here's the quick little thing. Let me put it on. And those of you who maybe you saw my last live stream will appreciate what I'm going to show you, because it's that again. One moment. Okay, here we go. Oh, Sorry. Okay, here we go.
In the chamber, that with the exception of those with prior arrangements with the society and the society's own videographers and photographers, there is to be no recording in the chamber. There will be one warning given, and on the second warning, people will be removed. The only exceptions are the society's videographers and those that have already arranged recording. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. This motion is not about non-believers, people who say they believe in Islam but don't actually follow its teachings. It is about Islam. And I would urge you all to follow through with that motion, with that wording, and actually scrutinize the religious teachings for what they actually are and not for what you want them to be to fit your narrative. Let me get to my point. Thank you. You will not have even heard that the verses that you are quoting come from a chapter in the Quran called repentance. Not conquest, not war, repentance. That it is the name the book itself gives to the chapter the proposition will tell you is a manual for killing you. Another claim we have heard tonight from Tommy Robinson is this: whoever changes his religion, kill him, from Bukhari. That sounds absolute, but it is not. The Hanafi school, followed by most British Muslims, in fact, most Muslims across the world, has long held that this only applies to those who leave Islam and wage war against communities. Wage war. It is not just, it is not honest, it is not just, and it is not honest to cherry pick quotes and verses. I will get to you. Let me get some progress, please.
Okay. So, according to this muallima, this sheikh, this great scholar of Islam, who debated on behalf of Islam, the debate was about, is the West right to be suspicious of Islam? And of course, her argument and her allies is it's not. And so she's telling us because the Sahih Bukhari, he who leaves his religion, kill him, hadith came up. And so she's telling us, well, you know, it sounds categorical, but it's really not. First of all, the Hanafi school, I remember I told you there's 4 schools. This is one of them. And then she said, which the majority of Muslims in Britain, and then she went on to say, which the majority of Muslims in the world, in fact, follow, does not believe in that. So first of all, that's a lie. The majority of Muslims do not follow the Hanafi school. Okay. At most, maybe 30% of Muslims around the world follow it. So, okay. Which is to say that even if she was correct, and we're going to show you how she's not, even if she was correct, that means 70% of Muslims do believe in killing the apostate. So not exactly a great relief. But the 30%, then she went on to say, she gave you that business about he who wages war. Again, implying as if this is war, that like conventional war, or someone who physically turns on and attacks the ummah. No, I told you, in Islam, you are waging war. Ibn Taymiyyah, the learned Sheikh al-Islam, okay, the Yusuf Qaradawi of his days, I think in the 14th century, he oftentimes would use that term, harb, war, coming from non-Muslims and from apostates, but he would talk about it. For example, he said the worst form of harb, war, is that with the tongue, which is, let's say, people who are attacking Islam, attacking Muhammad, exposing Islam, that is to say, and exposing Muhammad. That is war, okay? And as I already pointed to, apostasy is also war, because you are undermining the faith of the Muslim community when they see one of their own saying, yeah, no thanks, I don't believe in this religion, I think it's fake. So that is war, okay? So that I only brought you that last clip. If you saw, I did a live stream looking at this Oxford Union debate. And I remember even at the time I pointed out, much as I am right now, about what she said. But I have since looked into it, because she was making the point about the Hanafis believe it's just war. That's actually a very more modern revisionist interpretation. And yeah, we have a lot of those, a lot of moderate revisionists who are trying to revise the Quran, but they have no followers, or a tiny insignificant 1%, if at best, of the Islamic world. So yeah, the mainstream understanding of the apostasy is you kill them. Okay. So now, without further ado, let me bring on Neil Petrie of Legalize Apostasy. Hi, Neil. How are you?
I'm great, Raymond. Thanks very much for having me on.
And what's Nissar's situation? Is he? I see he's in the back, but maybe the video's not. We're not using the video, just audio.
Right. Yeah. I think if you.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Hi, Nissar. Are you there?
I'm here, sir.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Great. So, okay, Nissar Hussain is with us without video. And he is, like I said, he's going to tell us a little story, but you might have seen a video with him before. And Neil Petrie will also. Why don't we start with you, Nissar? I'm sure you've heard what I've been talking about, and you've seen that little video clip of that sheikh girl telling us what apostasy means and what it doesn't mean. So why don't you, in the context of telling us your story? I mean, of course, in our video, you gave us a very elaborate, excellent breakdown of your experiences. But for the purposes of this, if you can just give us a summary, maybe a 10-minute summary of your experiences with apostasy. And in that context, of course, feel free to respond to her or to any of the apologetics I'm sure you've heard and encountered.
Yeah, great to be with you, Raymond.
Yeah.
Neil, good to be with you as well. And Neil is my partner in crime, and he'll elaborate much on that actually. But look, yeah, it's deception all the way, isn't it? Let's be fair. And so this young lady, she's either totally deluded or an educated fool. Actually, but I didn't expect anything less actually from the likes of these people. Certainly, our experience is, and I talk of one born and raised in England as first generation, born to Pakistani parents, born to immigrant parents, of course, is since my conversion to Christianity, my family and they targeted me especially. You know how it is, being that male, being the husband and the the head of the household, so to speak. So nothing, absolutely nothing, has prepared me as somebody who was raised under English law. I would say civility, and British rule of law. So Sharia is an apostasy is a concept that I've had to face head on because of the punishment that fellow, if you like, and I'm ashamed to call myself a Pakistani. I really mean that actually. Yeah, so they've actually destroyed our English way of life, and yeah, they just wanted us to for myself to come back to Islam, and like you alluded to earlier, or rid me by any means necessary because of their deep-seated contempt and hate for those who leave Islam. Actually, had I become an atheist, I don't feel, Raymond, I would have suffered as much as we did. But they have a specific hatred for Christianity and Jews. I was often referred to as a Jew dog. So in essence, from 96, we suffered 20 years of persecution in the form of in daily intimidation. We're under siege on a daily basis. They're prowling around. They're driving their cars up and down the road. My wife and children couldn't walk along the street for being called, my wife was being called a prostitute. And we were often referred to as Jew dogs, actually. And these are second stroke, third generation born to first generation parents, such as myself, who have children and, of course, their children. It is absolutely surreal. And again, this is 7th century stuff. The police, I keep saying this and I'll continue to say it, they signed my death warrant on the basis that they didn't want to be called Islamophobic. You know, at some point in my life growing up, I used to hear this word racism, and no doubt there might have been a snippet of racism with the police against minorities. However, they have used this word Islamophobia to massive effect, where that you have politicians, the governments, police, and it actually it shuts down free speech, debate, and it takes away any kind of blame away from these people who are perpetrating. They're acting lawlessly with impunity, torching cars, drive-by brickings. Actually, it is just utter lawlessness. So it was a life and death situation for myself and my family, actually. And my children, all they've known growing up in their formative years over two addresses, over two parts of Bradford. And one really feels that rural part of Bradford, or certain parts of Bradford with high Muslim Pakistani areas, will they at some point in the future become Sharia state, a state within a state?
Sorry.
Just,
I was
just
there. I just
yes, just to elaborate. As you know,
uh,
Raymond, we eventually it culminated actually in a brutal attack where I almost lost my life. If it wasn't for these two amazing Polish young men who came to my aid, actually, and saved me. But I was hospitalized for 11 days, and it took me 7 months to get back on my feet. And we were then escorted out by armed police a year to the day because of this. They had this intelligence, as they put it. It was a SWAT style operation. They were fully armed. They blocked off roads. They came crashing through the back gate, almost through the front door. And they said, we can't leave you out of our sight, and we need to take you out of here because of this imminent threat to your life. And so on that day, in November of 2016, a year after my attack, we've lived under police protection in an obscure part of this country in relative hiding. And so this is the life that we now live.
yeah. I mean, these are amazing experiences that you've gone through, and you know, even as I hear them again the second time, they're always very impactful. And I know as you recount them yourself, you know, I know they weigh heavily on you because of especially what your family went through as well, and continue to go through. So, and you made a comment though, and I will definitely come back some more to your particular experiences. But you made a comment that caught my ear, which was, you know, that something to the effect that you're ashamed to be Pakistani. And if you don't mind, I'd like you to elaborate on that because I know what you're saying. You're not being racist. I understand that as well, of course. But I'd like you to unpack that in the context of what I'm going to say, which is, you know, for 15 or 16 years, I've been writing a monthly report covering the persecution of Christians around the world. Okay, and it happens at the hands of Muslims.
Yeah,
And I don't know what it is, but amongst the absolute worst and most horrific and almost sadistic comes from Pakistan. Okay, the Pakistanis there, the Muslims. It's almost every week Christian girls are abducted, raped, forcibly converted to Islam. Any man, any Christian who annoys any Muslim is accused of blasphemy, and then Muslims riot and burn churches. And, you know, and the Christians sometimes get killed. In fact, I'm sure you remember this story where two Christians, a married couple, I think it was in 2012, they were accused of a young married couple, and they were
that's right.
accused of burning a Quran. And so a mob went crazy and they burned them alive in a kiln. And
That's right.
it turned out right now that every single last one of those Muslims who there's records of and images and videos, they were arrested, but they've all been acquitted. Every single last one of them. Okay. So what is it with Pakistan, especially when it comes to these questions of apostasy, Christians being infidels? And it's really an important question for Britain, where you are right now, because the vast majority of Muslims, I believe, are Pakistani. So if you can please unpack for us this sort of, you know, this cultural intersection between Islam and Pakistani culture.
For me, brother, they have become the most sinister people, sinister society, actually, and it is simply just the case that again this lawlessness with impunity, and they have the authority, the police, and of course, when you have Pakistani MPs in the judiciary, in the hierarchy of the police, and it is simply mob rule. It is a mafia type of operation. And the fact is that you suffer as though you would in Pakistan. So there is something so sinister about these people that then refer to themselves as victims. I'm sure you can unpack it as well when it comes to Saudi Arabia and the inception of Islam, where they've pillaged, raped, murdered, butchered, conquered, but somehow they come out smelling of victimhood. Okay. So all I can put it down to, it is simply, it is the conquest nature of their religion, and somehow that they have this God-given, this divine rule that where whatever they do, they don't sort of shout out. In our case, nobody was screaming, "He's an apostate, kill him." But it is just working through the peripherals of their religion, internally, externally, and they've just have become far worse. I mean, to the point, would you know that, was it the Qataris, the Middle Eastern lot, they've stopped their children from coming to this country for further education. And it's just, I would say it's just, to my mind, to me, it is just demonic, and there's just no stopping them. It's just snowballing, and they've emasculated the English people. They have the law on their side, human rights and such like. It is so diabolical that honestly, I don't have the words to express to you, Raymond, how diabolical this situation is. And of course, it is a numbers thing. They have tripled the population. So whole areas, whole swathes of areas, London, the big cities, Birmingham, I could reel off city after city, inner cities and towns have become infested by mobs of them. The numbers have increased triple-fold. So, and it is just a dominance thing. Subjugate, increase, subjugate, dominate.
I agree with you, and I'm curious because you live in Britain. Did you follow or did you at all watch the Oxford Uni debate about Islam, where I played a little clip of?
Yes, I watched a snippet of that, actually, a portion of it. I wouldn't say I followed it all.
Okay.
I've got to be
Did you
honest
have
with you.
any? Did you have any reflections on it?
Actually, for me, again, it's so diabolical that somehow they're the victims and we're racist and they're persecuted, that I really have to sort of turn it off.
I understand. I understand. One last point I'll make again, for so everyone really understands. I think one of the reasons that, for example, you were attacked, and it's not even because these people, the Pakistanis or the Muslims in general, are so religious. Rather, this is ultimately what I think the importance is. It's a reflection of how Muslims see their identity. That is to say, Islam is not a spiritual thing they do on the side and then they have a secular life. Their national identity is tied up with Islam. So when you leave Islam, it's almost, this is why you're seen as a traitor, even if they are not religious, even if they don't read the Quran. It's kind of like, how dare you leave our tribe? You know, we are the Muslims, and how dare you claim something's better than us, or how dare you side with the enemy, right? And if you can speak a little to that, if you experienced that as well, was it really pious religious Muslims who were doing this, or was it just people? You know, they just felt like you've betrayed their people.
Yeah, I was referred to as a complete traitor, actually. And I think we've just had a conversation the first time around where I mentioned it is more Islam is more cultural than it is religious. So, and thank you for elaborating. It is cultural identity. It's us and them. It is not the case that Christianity is something that's very personal to me. But that, as you know, there's a separation of church and state. Well, there is no such thing as separation of mosque and state, and so it is very cultural. And they deem you to be a traitor, and so you're outside of the Ummah, the Muslim Brotherhood. But excuse me, I'm born in England. There is progression. There is freedom of religion. There's freedom of every kind. And how can I be boxed in to a 7th century Arabian cultural identity, which I totally reject? And you're right also, the so-called committed Muslims, they would converse and they might get a bit assertive, slightly angry, but it's on the whole 95% in my estimation, 95 are nominal, Raymond. So they're doing the selling of the drugs because, let's be fair, they have a massive record on drug selling for decades now, okay? And we can talk about the terrible plight of the mass rapes of English girls. And again, that's all down to Islam as well, whatever your right hand possesses, right? You know, and all the rest of it. So they have a massive drug record, selling drugs, pushing drugs, doing drugs. And so it is these nominal Muslims that basically turn up on a Friday prayer, if they do. And so they're just under the banner or umbrella of Islam. There is nothing to suggest actually that their conduct, is so noble, and fitting that they're going praying 5 times a day. So it is these sort of people actually that were perpetrating. Again, it's like you say, and you're absolutely right. It's an identity thing. They have made it us and them. Well, that's not my upbringing. We, whether we were a Sikh, Jamaican, Irish, we grew up identifying as English. The only culture that you had is when you went home, in your primary school days, for example, and you'd have to revert speaking the lingo to your parents because my father's English was limited, like my mother as well. And so you picked up the Mirapuri, the dialect and such like, and we were taught Urdu at the mosque setting as well as the Quranic scripture and the Quranic scriptures. With a good lot of beating, for misspelling and all the rest of it. So I resented it going back then, actually. But the thing is, yes, it is very much tied up in their cultural identity. And for me, Raymond, the saddest thing is, and I can give you an example from my own family. My nieces, a few of my nieces, are hijabbed from top to bottom, but yet my sisters, they were dressed conservatively in some lovely, the long shalwar, the long dress, and the pantaloons, and they might have a little veil that would be just sort of modestly just wrapped around their neck. They didn't wrap it around their head, for example. But here we have now. So the second generation, my nieces are, they have the hijab, actually full head covering, long Arabic. So they've taken on Arabic culture. So the food is Arabic. All the sayings are Arabic. And they greet each other in Arabic, and they dress in Arabic. The young men, long Saudi Arabian Arabic, long sort of clothing right down to their ankles. So that is their identity. I've seen them going to school like that. I actually stopped a young, looking back, a 12, 13-year-old who was dressed in Arabic clothing with a satchel over his shoulder. And I was just passing him. I said, "Excuse me, really sorry to stop you, young man, but Don't you go to school? Me thinking he's going to a mosque or something, you know, a madrasa, first thing in the morning. He said, actually, I'm going to school. So I said, oh, don't the school, you know, don't they object to you wearing the Arabic clothing and such like? He said, oh, no, 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 no. Well, what you do when sort of like 90, 95% are Pakistani or stroke Muslim. And so this is what England has become in all the
Yeah.
cities and towns.
Okay, thanks a lot for all that, Nissar. We're definitely going to come back to you, but I do want to bring Neil Petrie on now. He's on right now. If you can tell us a little bit, Neil, whatever you want to tell us, but if you can also speak of what your work, what you've been doing, Legalize Apostasy, and I believe you're trying to help apostates in general, but those in Britain in particular. So if you can tell us a little bit about that and whatever else you'd like to add.
Yeah, thanks. My background is military intelligence in terms of what I started out as. You know, my parents, my father was RAF. My grandfather was in the army across Europe, you know, battling away in World War II. So all three of my two brothers and I, we all went in the army. And, so we have a tie to the country. Like Nissar, you know, I was actually born in Germany, funnily enough, because my dad was in Germany in the Air Force at the time. So Nissar was actually British born. I'm not, but technically I am because legally, you know, it's our military hospital.
Yeah.
So I, you know, went in. I was going to do my bit. I volunteered for 16 years. So you know, when I see these people, Muslims, saying, "Oh, it's traitors to Islam," well, what about traitors to our country then? Okay, so I came out in '97, and I started working in the Central Asia and the Middle East. And I had 15 years, basically, pretty much full time, working in Muslim countries. And I had, you know, literally a couple of thousand employees in one of the companies that I ran. So I know Islamic life. I know Muslims, you know, and some are like, if you go to Central Asia, they're more like vodka drinking Muslims. They're not that, you know, serious about it. But then obviously it goes to the Middle East. Some are more serious than others. But like Nissar was saying, he's saying, you know, 95% of them are, they're not that serious, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
However, as you know, technically, unfortunately, Sharia is the foundation of the faith as far as the system is concerned, you might say. And the guardians of that, the guides for the ummah, the community, are the ulama. These are the Sharia jurists, the sheikhs that you were talking about. So that is the issue that you've got, is that the group has to conform really to what these Sharia jurists say legally as far as the system is concerned. And of course, the apostasy issue is, as you quite rightly said, it is a death sentence in those four major law schools in the Sunni, but in the Shia as well. You know, the Jafari school, same thing. And like you said, the women, I think they get beaten, I think, during the prayers or something. Supposed to, if they're in prison, they're meant to be beaten every time there's prayers, and they might get fed, they might not get fed. So it's a death sentence in the end, one way or the other, if they don't renounce, you know, their apostasy. Mm-hmm. So if you get the great manual that you can get on this one is this one here, which is the Reliance of the Traveller, you know, and it's a Shafi manual actually, but it was approved by Al Azhar, which you know is the most prestigious school in, you know, the Sunni Islamic world in terms of jurisprudence and all the rest of it, studies ancient university. And this recommends this book, and it tells you, as you were just saying, you know, you kill anyone who leaves Islam, who apostatizes. There are many references to that in this one manual, and you can get lots of manuals on this, you know, and you'll find the same thing said. And you might get, as you said, some modern scholar trying to turn it a bit this way or that way because it's, you know, it's had an impact now in the West. You won't find this in the 1800s, early 1900s.
No, you never do.
No,
it's basically for Western consumption, I feel. But before I forget, though, and I do want you to continue, but did you watch the Oxford Union debate? And if so, did you have any reflections?
Yeah, no, I watched some of it because I was watching Lawrence Fox, wasn't it, was on, you know, and he had his little thing with what they thought was the cartoon coming out of the envelope.
Yeah.
And you know, there was a mad panic, you know, about that. And then he just pulled that picture of Rees-Mogg, you know. So he was just using, I mean, he's an actor. He's good at that kind of thing. And it was quite amusing. But, you know, as I say, as a military person, for 16 years, I have I've got great fondness for my own country, and we don't like traitors either, but we got a lot of them, you know. But we don't go around saying, you're going to kill every single one who leaves Christianity, for instance, and we don't say kill everyone who has a word against Britain. However, the laws used to be you'd be executed for being a traitor. But they're still applying this for just leaving your religion. Those laws, as you say, the reform is the problem with Islam, in its law codes and the Sharia, because the jurists are tied into these codes. And in particular with the apostasy law is one of those 7 offences where the punishment was specified either in the hadiths or in the Quran. This is what makes it one of those exceptional law punishments, because Muhammad, as you said, quite specifically stated, if a man changes his religion, then kill him. So, and of course, the greatest crime in the West is genocide. And, that includes protection, as basically stated by Jeffrey Robertson as well, who's one of our leading lawyers in the West in this arena. And he, in fact, was the boss of Starmer, Prime Minister Starmer. He was the boss of Lord Hermer, who became our Attorney General. And he made clear in his book on Mullahs Without Mercy that if you left the religion you were born into, you would be categorized as protected under the Genocide Convention as one of the groups that are protected under the Genocide Convention, Article 2. Okay, so it's very clear. And Article 2, it doesn't just say killing, it also says threatening to kill, putting people through mental torture, basically, etc., which is obviously in Nissar's case and his whole family's case. So
well, it's obviously the case for every Muslim who wants to. They know they're threatened, and there is a certain mental amount of turmoil. Obviously, even if they don't, and for many of them, maybe they never apostatize precisely because of that.
Correct. So, in fact, every Muslim is living under this death threat, basically, from the Sharia, from the the sheikhs who are saying this will be applied against you, no matter what that lady might have said. So again, they trundle out a lady because obviously that shows, But how many of these sheikhs have you seen who are female, Raymond?
Yeah, exactly. Well, as I pointed out, I'd love to see her go to Pakistan and go into a mosque and start, talking the way she was talking and dress that way.
Exactly.
Before you proceed with this genocide thing, which is very important, I definitely want you to unpack it. Because you were kind of going there as a British man. I know you didn't watch. The reason I mentioned that particular Oxford Union debate, because I think in many ways it represents kind of what's going on in Britain. Because honestly, I didn't think that the side that was arguing against Islam, the side that was saying it's the West is right to be suspicious of Islam, I found some of them were very good, but some seemed to kind of equivocate and weren't strong enough, weren't forceful enough. And is that really a reflection of the whole issue in Britain? That there's a certain bit of, or a lot of appeasement and sort of capitulation, this desire to be the nice guy, to, not be racist, not to be Islamophobic, xenophobic, or any of those things. That's why I was mentioning it. So in that vein, what are your thoughts about Britain's overall response to this? Essentially, I mean, the way it looks, sometimes it's like a takeover, depending on where you look, but this Islamic, mushrooming in Britain. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, it's under the globalization process, which has been going on around the world. Of course, they are implementing these controls on speech, etc. Now, see, I read manuals like this, not every day, but I read them pretty routinely. I've lived in Muslim countries for a decade and a half, and I still go out there occasionally to some of them. So I have a great feel for Islam, the Islamic world, and Sharia and the law, because as someone who had served in the military, I like to defend my country and my people. And when I saw the lies that I was seeing on our press in UK whenever I came back, to be frankly, Raymond, I had to get rid of my television, otherwise it would have got destroyed. Because I just got rid of it. I couldn't watch television, and this was 20 years ago. We're talking long. I
That's
realized,
nothing compared to now. Yeah.
yeah, I'm an intelligence guy, and I don't like to see people lying to me. And in fact, funnily enough, I did write to the communities minister back 15 years ago or so, and I said to him, look, you know, the issue is that Islam will kill you if you leave it. I said, that's the reality. And I went, it doesn't matter if it's, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, the Jafari, Ibadi, Ismaili, whichever, you go through them all. They're all going to kill you. And those are the rules that these sheikhs go on about. You might get the occasional argument with someone within those, but you won't get it, from any of the sheikhs, really. It's not going to happen. So I made this point to the British government. I wrote to them. And I got a 5-page boilerplate back. There will never be Sharia here, etc. And I knew then we've got a real problem here in Britain, and that this at the time I thought it was probably genocidal, but I didn't have the expertise at the time. And I think this is the issue. A lot of the issue is that people are frightened of talking about it because they don't know. But I'll talk about it because I do know what I'm talking about. I have studied this for decades. I mean, I read the Quran when I left the army, and I went to Azerbaijan for nearly a year. I read the Quran twice whilst I was there because I wanted to know a bit about the culture in Azerbaijan. And they're not, they're not ardent, so they weren't that ardent. But I thought, well, it's an Islamic culture. And being an ink guy, I like to know what's going on around me and what people are thinking. So that's what I did. And I was.
Can you just go back to that response they sent you? Well, you said they basically told you there'll never be Sharia here. You mean that they accepted there's a threat, but they were reassuring you that don't worry about it, we have it in hand, or they were basically not even acknowledging there's a threat at all?
No, yeah, they weren't acknowledging that there was a threat. There's Britain, we've got common law, blah, blah, blah. And I think the issue is that a lot of Britons, obviously, they don't want to say anything because they've been conditioned by this, 1984 process that they've been put through. They watch the adverts on the telly, I watch the news and they talk tripe, and then I realise, because I know their law codes and I know what their thoughts are. And, and also, as you know, it's not only the apostasy laws. You will recognise this, one of the, coming from the Sunnah, is war is deception. Who said that, Raymond? You see?
No, well, the same guy who said, kill he who leaves his religion, Muhammad.
Exactly. So, their prophet is telling them, deceive your enemy, of course. And, and we live in the Dar al-Harb, which is the land of war. We don't live in Dar al-Islam. So we're in the land of war. War is deception. And unfortunately, our leaders, and I include my own military intelligence guys in this, they don't have the benefit of my experience of living for 15 years in Muslim countries, and in the meantime studying all of these things and reading things like this, which is another apologist, stuff. Tariq Ramadan, who's just been, done for 18 years, I think it is, for multiple rapes in France. But he was an Oxford professor, when he was writing all of this stuff and misleading people. So, this is where the country has to wake up. And that's, when I saw Nissar, nearly 10 years ago now, and I went, this guy, is a clear demonstration of this complete failure of our system, not only in Britain here, it's in the West. You've got the same happening and starting in America, as you know, as well. So it's across the West. And, if you understand how the EU was working and they were setting up this system of bringing in the workers from North Africa, okay, that was the plan. The plan was to integrate these people, and as the French really led it, there's a Euromed alliance or something. I've forgotten the name of it exactly. So this is long-term strategic stuff. And as a military intelligence officer, I study strategy. So I study what these people say. As a military intelligence guy, I'm looking to see what the opposition is trying to do. And of course, if you can dupe our political class, on the left, for instance, rather than the left in Iran got fooled, etc., etc. We all know that story. But, this is deliberate, and Tariq Ramadan, of course, was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood royalty. His predecessors in the family had set up, through Switzerland and then into Germany, into the mosque in Munich, the first of these Muslim Brotherhood centers long ago. And of course, that has just developed ever since. But the issue is that, what does 1517 mean to you, Raymond?
Is that Martin Luther's
Exactly.
thesis? Yeah.
31st of October, 1517, we get the thesis. But the issue is you then could change and leave the Roman Catholic Church. And that's just the point. Religious tolerance was born then, really, in terms of, allowing people to set up in separate, groups. The problem with Islam is, of course, it's stuck in these 7th century law codes that were codified, as you know, over a couple of 100 years.
But I would also argue, I know what you're saying, but I would also argue that, because it almost implies what you're saying, that is, Islam needs to catch up with Christianity, which learned to, everyone can follow what they want. But Christianity never had Jesus or any prophet saying, "He who leaves his religion, kill him." Okay, so I would argue maybe Christianity had a cultural, again, the tribal mentality, how you can't leave, but it was never part of the religion. That's why you could branch out and the Protestant Reformation and all that. But actually, you said something which I want to move back to Nissar, because you said something about him. You said the British system really failed him, and I know he's talked about this too. But one of the ways that really strikes me as remarkable in its failure is that, again, if you compare and contrast, let's say a Christian goes to a Muslim country and in any way, shape, or form shows some sort of attraction or desire to assimilate into that culture. They would love that person. They would try to, further entice them to become Muslim, to become part of the culture. They would, that happens all the time. And I see someone as Nissar who is very British. Okay, he's unlike the Pakistanis, who don't assimilate. I mean, just listening to him, his demeanor, the way his brain functions, he wants to be a Christian. He is a Christian. You would have thought that something like Britain would have, been very welcoming, would very accommodating, would have tried to, actually nourish and support that system. But it seemed like, if anything, and what I see is they actually push that away, in part because they condemn and denounce their own heritage and their own religion and their own identity. And that also is why so many Muslims never assimilate, because they already don't have that in them. But when you go and you live amongst these Westerners who, by their very nature, is to actually push other would-be assimilating civilizations away by virtue of the fact of how they talk about their own civilization. So I wonder to what extent, if Nissar, I know you're listening, if you could tell me a little bit of what I said, and am I accurate in that? Because you have the final say, because I'm talking about you.
No, Raymond. Honestly, you encapsulate it so well, actually, and you obviously have a lot of depth and knowledge. And in actual fact, Raymond, I so admire you, because I think to myself, should I have kept up to this over the 40 years I've been outside of Islam, I've been thrown to the wolves. I've lost my immediate family. For example, my mother died a couple of years ago. I'm really surprised they alerted to me that my mother had died. And actually, they've done their level best to keep me away from paying respects, actually, and told me not to come to the mosque even. I went, regardless. She was my mother. And this is the mentality that somehow they felt my presence in a brick building would defile the mosque. And they'd done their level best to keep me away from my mother's casket, not even allowing me to pick it up, actually, because they were all, brother-in-laws and, my niece and nephews, who have their own children, were actually, surrounding the coffin and just basically pushing me out, But look, it's just a very sad situation where after the first generation, when they get to a certain point, they become holier than thou. They get steeped in the Quran and the Islamic religion, and of course, it alters their brainwaves. It alters, their whole way of thinking, their concept, and somehow now they're no longer holding on to British values. I mean, look, all cultures have good points and bad points, but overall, here is a country that has given your parents an opportunity. Well, the menfolk, the males who first came over, as my father did. It started with my grandfather, if you go back before him, actually. And the bottom line is that you have all these amazing benefits, opportunities afforded you in the West. But now you come to a certain age, you're in your sort of, your midlife, and then you turn to the mosque, and your whole way of thinking, that your concept is altered towards Saudi Arabia and the religion of Islam, and these are kuffars and kafirs, which I was labeled often actually, and so it's not good. It doesn't bode well, but the country, as Neil has alluded to, it is a failure of the state. This government, not only this present government, past governments over the last 40 years have failed me and my family very willfully and miserably. And Raymond, and we discussed it last time.
Yeah, but please tell us about it again. Yeah.
The leaders of the bishops of the established Church of England are actually 4 bishops of Bradford turned their backs on us on the altar of Muslim dialogue and friendship and interfaith. Okay, we were treated with contempt, and the chief, sort of culprit of them all, Justin Welby, as you know, had to then resign in utter disgrace because it had been found out he'd covered over a paedophile Sunday school teacher, and there were other vicars under his jurisdiction that were obviously not acting in the good faith of Christianity, and what amounts to kind of paedophilia and such like. Okay, but the fact is, this man in a chance meeting, well, I didn't go out to meet him. I was in a Christian setting in a convention, and I happened to speak to Bishop Josiah, the head of GAFCON, the Worldwide African Anglicans. That this is back in August of 2014. I introduced myself, and I said to him, "Sir, I just want to say to you that my family and I we're in a life and death situation, and we've had no support from these Anglican bishops. And in the duration of our time and trouble, we've 4 bishops have come and gone. And lo and behold, Justin Welby, from nowhere, he's seen me. He was very much part and parcel of that sort of Anglican conference. It was a bunch of Southerners, Anglican. And I'm not implying ever that all Anglicans are bad, not at all. But I'm simply referring to these bishops and the Archbishop Justin Welby, who rudely jumped on the podium while I was speaking to this man, interrupted the conversation, got in between myself and this Bishop Josiah, and he pulled him away from me. And as he started walking away, I actually said, Mr. Welby, I really need a few minutes of your time, because we are in a life and death situation. The reason I'm here is because somebody has invited me and my family to get us out of our home, and because we're under siege yet again, and my children are suffering terrible trauma and upset, and they've got us out for 3 or 4 days here, and I desperately need your help. And he said, actually dismissed me with contempt, waved me off with his hand. We know all about apostasy, and we're doing all that we can. But unfortunately, that is farthest from the truth, because he wasn't interested whatsoever. So what they've bought into this lie. And of course, we know about political correctness as well as multiculturalism. So these things need to be trashed. This is the death of Europe. This is the death of the UK. And I pray God it's not going to be the death of America. Okay. And so 15 months later, I was almost wiped out outside my front door, getting into my car. Okay. So this is how serious it is. And so the church, Raymond, they have failed us, my brother. They have failed us very willfully and miserably, just like the police and the government. And as you know, we have Shabana Mahmood. She's on record when she's been interviewed saying publicly, and I could obviously forward that on to you, is actually that she takes her guidance from her religion. And Neil will know, because we were in the studio where Neil is now, actually, where I was interviewed on GB News not so long coming back from the States. Okay, and the questions I raised was one of them: does Shabana Mahmood want me dead? Okay, because of the fact she adheres to Sharia, and as Neil quite rightly has pointed out, the reliance of the traveller. And by the way, I was none the wiser, because we grow up in this thing. We're taught to go mosque. We're taught the Arabic scriptures. Okay, okay, Urdu as a secondary sort of thing to the main point of learning Arabic scriptures. Beaten, whipped, and ears yanked and kicked all over the place to get it in your head, okay, for your troubles. And the moral story is this, actually. Page 595 for your wonderful viewers, if they ever want to get the hold of the Reliance of the Traveller, clearly states, as you know, Raymond, it's the ugliest form of disbelief. And it states in black and white. Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. Ugliest form of disbelief. There we are. Apostasy, ridda, and of course, just hold it up a bit more if you can, Neil, please. Just that section there.
So, okay.
Yeah, and of course, it goes on to say how then we should be killed.
Yeah.
And by the way, Raymond, if I may, so thanks, Neil. If I may allude to you mentioned about the Hanbali.
Yeah.
The thing I know about that, if I'm not mistaken, they don't prescribe the death for females per se. They obviously they beat and imprison them until such a time that they recant, I don't know, Christianity or atheism, whatever, and actually come back to Islam.
And and that's precisely why they're considered progressive.
Because they don't. This Abu Chapi, whatever, he didn't. He quoted as saying that he didn't consider the females as well. They're non-combatants, if you like. They
Right.
didn't pose a danger to Islam in a physical sense. Okay.
Because they're secondary anyway. This is the same logic of, a Muslim man can marry a Christian or Jewish woman, but a Jewish or Christian woman, I'm sorry, a Muslim man can marry a Christian or Jewish woman, but a Muslim woman
Woman,
cannot
she
marry.
cannot marry.
And the reason for that, of course, is because in Islam it's so patriarchal. So that it doesn't matter if the wife is an infidel, because the one in charge is the husband, so he can keep her in line. But you
Yeah.
can't have but if the man's an infidel, you can't have a female, be a Muslim, because that means an infidel is lording over a Muslim. So it's the same logic for the apostasy, which is because a woman is so secondary and doesn't pose a threat because she's already subjugated. You don't have to kill her. You can just kind of keep her and starve her. Before we go to Neil, I just want you to elaborate a little bit on what you were saying, which is, it's one thing that the police and the authorities failed you miserably, as you told me in our original conversation. And at some point, maybe you can just summarize it for whoever missed it. But it is really remarkable that the Christian leadership, and this is what I was saying, which is that if a Christian or Jew or whatever goes to a Muslim country, and he exhibits any kind of willingness to convert, oh wow, they will just jump on them and they will do everything. And if anyone gets in the way, they'll kill him. But in your case, the Christian leadership were amongst the ones who were completely pushing you away, and just it's just amazing.
To my mind, not only are they cowards, they're effeminate. Okay. Listen, sir.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, I was called an effeminate because I raised a point, actually, on a Facebook, page, and I turned around and that was it. A preacher was being arrested. I kid you not, by an effeminate copper. Actually, you would think he sounded more like a young lady, actually, than a mask or a male. Okay, and I just commented and I said, this effeminate policeman,
Mhm.
most probably he comes across to me, and you can pick up characteristics. Seems a bit LGBT to me. That is his prerogative. I have no issue with that
Mhm.
whatsoever. You know how it is, right? We
Mhm.
love everybody, actually, and but we don't, love their sort of ways. But um, and some chappie in Queensland actually poured scorn on me, and he said, actually, looking at your picture profile, you look quite effeminate. And I said, excuse me, sir, I'm as masculine as they come. Okay, I defied Islam for over 20 years. Okay, and I spent 11 days, and I can prove my scars to you, actually. And I continue, and I dare not bow the knee to Sharia enforcement. And so I've kind of proved my stripes. So I'd like you to sort of forget that, you know what I mean? And so this is how it is. So you have complete capitulation, emasculation, and I'm happy for Neil to sort of say his piece if he wants, and
Speak up as the token Brit.
yeah, actually, and they have, as Neil used that reference, conditioned,
Mhm.
because as soon as you tweet, Lucy Powell, you've heard of these names, a counselor's wife, tweeted, okay, she appreciates it was a bit harsh and she went over the top and it was spur of the moment. She took it down, and she was imprisoned for months, actually, for no, beg your pardon, 3 years she got for that, but she served half her time. This is the madness. So you have the English people who are living in fear, and they just have been emasculated and conditioned. And the fact is, on the flip side, we have the Muslim sort of communities up and down this country who are turning England into a Pakistani ghetto, which I totally am against, because I have been born and raised, and I know in this country what it was pre mass Pakistani or Muslim immigration. Okay, and it was homogenous, it was civil, it was very peaceful. Okay, and it was very, again, just lovely. It was an amazing country to be in, and this is why I fear so much for America. And of course, you're seeing that yourselves. And so, yeah, and so here we are, and I would dare not betray my upbringing, my English pals, my Jamaican pals, who were very much as British as I was. We were all taught to be British, and we all identified as one, and we, argued and we scrapped and we made friends together, but we identified as British, English, we'll call it what you will. And that was the common denominator that held us together. But that, over the last few decades, and you have, of course, the Muslim boom. They're outbreeding the English. Let's just speak facts. Let's just be very honest here. Sort of, and the average, family, 4 up to 6 children. But then you have, add to that equation, the polygamous marriages, 3, 4, 5 children per each. Before you know it, there's 20 plus there. And by the way, the government are paying for each wife and looking after the children, and they're the very same children that go and join the Allah Akbar brigade and come running after them, trying to chop their heads off. And so, like, honestly, it's just madness. You can just go on and on, really can. But it is a very depressing picture here.
Yeah, Nissar, I completely agree. Okay, Neil. um, the one thing I want to comment on and have you respond to is there's been an endless amount of non-Western people, former Muslims, non-Muslims, who have criticized Western behavior for not being strong enough. Nissar was talking about emasculation, and it reminded me, I actually once had someone help me translate an African man, and he was some kind of scholar, but he was writing in French. And he was basically complaining about the emasculation, again, of the white man, because, and he was talking about in the context of how the white man is constantly being shamed by historic slavery, okay, and how there's always kind of trying to be apologetic and make up for it and appease, as opposed to just seeing reality, which is everyone enslaved everyone, oftentimes in a more horrific manner. And if anything, at least I think it's your country that abolished slavery, if anything. So
That's right.
what do you make of all these non-Western people who are yelling at Western people and saying, "Wake up, man up, stop being emasculated, stop"? And I'm not addressing this to you because you're not emasculate. I know that, okay, and this is why we can have this conversation. But as a British man, and you're hearing what you're hearing, and I've heard it from so many other people. How do you respond to that? What is this? How does it strike you?
Yeah, I mean, it is reality, and it is deliberate too. Of course, there are people who, be they Muslims who want to see us collapse, be they people who've been in some colonial situation who want to see us collapse. Might be Obama, for instance. He didn't like the Brits even. So there are many people who don't like Britain, and they chipped away. The left has been chipping away because they're socialists and they believe the whole system is, and the system isn't perfect. It certainly is not. I'm not an advocate for our current form of government. And I wrote a book called Saving the West a few years back now, 2023, and I covered, like you're saying, about the slavery issue. That whole slavery issue, I covered it all, and how tens of millions were taken by Islam across the centuries out of West Africa, East Africa, it doesn't matter, and there were a lot more, and all the men were castrated, women were taken, huge distances, many dying in the deserts across, Algeria now and all the rest of it. So, and how many whites? Slav is the slave, and people talk about, there was the Barbary pirates coming up and they were raiding our shores, even Iceland. But there were millions taken from southern Russia. It took centuries to work
The
their way back.
Crimean Khanate, which was Islamic, as well as the Ottoman Turks, yeah.
Exactly. So, I know my history, and that's why I don't get too concerned about what I say, because I've generally checked it out. And I will, if someone says you go to court, and I'll say, well, I'll see them there, then we'll go through the books, and we'll see who's right, won't we?
But this idea of a lot of non-Brits, let's say, telling Brits, you need to stop apologizing, you need to stop feeling guilty, you need to assert your identity, you need to assert your civilization, you need to act like other people in their civilizations, because it's not just Muslims who are assertive about their, it's everyone is of their own civilization, which is what kind of Neil was touching on, and which is what I'm saying. A lot of non-Westerners do say that. Is there truth to it? Is there truth to it?
The Uni Party that you've got in charge for decades now is an apologist for all of this stuff. They are bought and sold by these global interests, and it's about eradicating nations. You see, and Britain said, "Oh, we want out of Europe." Well, that was it. You see, that's the target. Got even bigger on our back. Hence, why you've got what you see being applied to us today. The Americans, you've had it. The borders were opened by Biden, etc., and before that others, and we've had the same. The whole of Europe's got the same issue, but Britain in particular is a great target because the people in charge are even more stupid, quite frankly, than the American leaders were. We're stuck with these people who are unrealistic. They don't know what Islam means. Look, I visited Dibba in the UAE, and I remember going there, and there was this sign saying this is where 10,000 apostates were killed in the Ridda Wars. So that I remember I visited this place and seen one of these battle sites. I've worked in India as well, set up companies in India, and I studied the Indian history. So you look there, and it's a complete destruction of the Hindu civilization. 1,000 years ago was when the first really effective Muslim invasions took place. And there are 19 raids by one Afghan warlord who came in, slaughtered by they still remember it. I remember reading what's his name, Nehru's History of India. He was still spitting feathers about this guy in that book, The History of India. And so they've been through this, and then they lost tens of millions, hundreds. Well, I think it's 80 million was what they were estimated were killed over the centuries by these Islamic leaders. So and
which is ironic because the ones who ended up converting are the Pakistanis.
Yeah.
Because they, and Nissar can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in Pakistanis, and the word I believe means the land of the pure.
Correct.
So after being butchered, millions of Indians, the ones who finally became Muslim, are now butchering other people for not being or not staying Muslim. Hence the irony.
Yeah. And the Hindu Kush means the Hindu slaughter, because all of the Hindu slaves being sent through those mountains to Central Asia, etc. Yeah. So,
okay. Go ahead. Finish, Neil.
Yeah. So Britain basically, is not taught this stuff. Okay, I know it. I've studied it. The historians could be taught this stuff, and the schools could be taught this, but no, because there is this unfortunate gutlessness, at the top. And ignorance. It's a mixture of the two, I believe. There is cowardice, there is complicity. And so between all of these various problems that we've got in terms of our leadership, they ram it down your throat. And, obviously Nissar is a great example of someone who demonstrates that problem through his courage and standing up to these people. But even the church leaves him alone, hanging out there to dry. So, Britain today is led by people who are ill-informed and cowards and, looking for their own future, really, quite frankly. So, the whole system is in dire straits. However, we've still got the numbers. We've still got nearly 2 million veterans. We've still got people who love this country. And, when you see the swings that are happening here, towards those who want to deal with these problems and are realistic about what it means, because of the increase in rapes across Europe is staggering. The figures, when you can get them, but you can see. And, it's not suddenly the guys, living out in the countryside have got, full of their oats. No, it's to do with obviously the ones who are being imported here, deliberately, very deliberately, undoubtedly. I'm giving my intelligence assessment here, by the way. Don't forget, I'm a professional intelligence officer. I'm happy to state why I would back these things. I can show the evidence for it all. And, there is a massive problem here. And the boats, are getting larger and the numbers coming in are increasing because the government knows there's a real problem with the people. And they're trying to tamp us down, the police, because the genocide case that, there is against these 11 nations, around the world, it's still openly state they'll kill you.
Can you tell us about those 11 nations? We were talking about them, and I think we can try to pull them up, but just so people know about this question of apostasy, a lot of times laws that are pretty controversial in Islam won't be codified by Muslim countries, but the people will act according to them. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is the case with apostasy. So there are some Muslim countries that do not outlaw apostasy, but if you are an apostate, the community will rise against you. The police won't help you. They'll turn their back, the judges, the authorities. But as it happens is there are 11 Muslim countries which actually do codify the execution of apostates. Aren't there? Can you tell us their names?
Yeah, I've got the list here for you, in fact, and I can show your people here.
That young lady from the Oxford Uni. Yeah, I can read them. Let me.
Yeah, you can read them.
Put on my glasses.
I can. Afghanistan, Brunei, Iran, Mauritania, Maldives, Nigeria, Pakistan. Oh, well, there's a surprise. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, and Yemen.
Yeah.
Okay. See, besides that, you've got the codes indicating, where they're from.
So for anyone who's because this is very significant for anyone who still thinks that this apostasy business is open to interpretation, or it's only this radical sheikh or this one mosque. Here are 11 bona fide Muslim nations, some of whom are our allies, like Saudi Arabia, who make it illegal and punishable by death to leave Islam. Okay. And yet we have these people who have the audacity to show up at this Oxford Union talking about no, it's apostasy isn't what you think. But go ahead, Neil.
Yeah. So these 11 countries are telling you, look at the UN, Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. You can choose your religion, la la la. But and then obviously European Court of Human Rights and the all of our issues. So they're going to kill you if you leave Islam. They're quite happily telling you this. So what has the UN done about it? Has it ever taken the UN genocide case and said to these people, waved in front of their faces and said, you could actually be done for genocide under these codes? They say, well, we're not signed up to it. But it doesn't mean you can't be done for it, because in London, countries can be taken to court in London for any crime. And of course, genocide is the worst crime in the West, whereas leaving Islam is the worst crime in Islam. It tells you it's the ugliest form of unbelief. So you've got the ugliest form of a crime in Islam against the ugliest form of crime in the West. So this is a civilizational, existential issue. So it's a dividing line that makes very clear for our government, which is why I wrote to the communities minister, 15 years back, and said, this is a major issue. At the time, I didn't have all of this knowledge about, but I could tell, I could say, look, it's hardly toleration, is it? I mean, when you hear them talk about Britain, they say, oh, it's a tolerant country. Well, apparently not. It's tolerant in certain parts of the country, but not in others. So these 11 countries are telling you they'll kill you if you leave, and the UN does nothing about it. Nobody does anything about it. And I've read books on genocide and genocide convention issues and all the rest of it, and they make clear that the apostasy issue is avoided at all these conferences where the genocide is discussed. Apostasy in Islam is forgotten about. It's just never gets onto the agenda. So that's telling you the power of the oil money or whatever else it is. There's all kinds of stuff going on, corruption, and it's time now to call a halt to it. And Britain, we ended slavery, mate. All right, slavery. It took us from early 1800s till the 1870s nearly. We had the Royal Navy sitting off the shores of Africa, right up in fact until the 1900s. We had blokes still on the East African coast fighting against the slavers. We lost hundreds of sailors fighting these people, and saving 150,000 slaves' lives, at least, on the ships that we recaptured and took them back to shore. So, we have a magnificent history in those terms. And then when the Civil War, our Lancashire cotton workers would not take the cotton in from the south of America, okay? Mm-hmm. We would not take it. The rich people who owned the mills would take them in. They wanted it, but the workers said, no, we're not going to work on that stuff. So, Britain has got a magnificent record of looking after people. It's got its downside, of course, because it didn't do exactly well with all of those countries they invaded. But that was, again, the leadership. The British people do not feel this. We don't want these people to be threatened like Nissar. So, and around the world, all these people are living under a death threat. Simple as that, and it's an issue that is not addressed, and it's never addressed. And so the Legalize Apostasy campaign is just saying, well, look, can't you just reform that? I mean, they stopped slavery in Saudi Arabia. That didn't stop until 1962. So, why don't they join the rest of the world in not threatening to kill you if you leave the religion? So these 11 states are the example, as you said, the outliers still there showing you that they do believe this, and that all comes from Sharia. It's not a cultural thing; it's a culture based on Sharia. Right. So, and if they can reform it, then every law becomes reformable. Then, because as the problem for Sharia is that the jurists don't want to change a single thing.
Because it's God's law. It's because God has already ordained it. So there's, how can humans change it?
Or Allah. Should we say?
I know, but to make it intelligible,
heretics, heretics used to be killed in Christianity. Heretics used to get killed in Judaism. They used to apply the same rules in Judaism. That only changed when they got emancipation. But if you were in a ghetto in Poland in the 1700s, you could still be killed by the rabbi. So that's changed anyway.
Okay, Nissar. Neil's offered a lot of meat there for us to talk about. Any reflections, any thoughts, anything you'd like to elaborate on?
Well, Actually, I could pull my hair out, but the West is suffering from amnesia. It's more, as Neil said, petrodollars talk. It is willful amnesia. So just highlighting the right to freedom of thought and conscience. This is the Declaration of Human Rights, just to pick up on Article 18. This speaks volumes to me. But who is going to protect the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion? Why isn't Islam? Why aren't these Muslim countries brought to book? What is it with America or Europe and the West that has failed? You know, I believe many thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of ex-Muslims. Very briefly, I was just talking to a dear friend of mine who heads the British Christian Pakistani Association here in this country, actually. And his brother-in-law was born and raised in Pakistan. And he was telling me about a gentleman that does work in Pakistan, sort of podcasts and things, but you can never see his face. And he says that you get many, many young girls who are very, very distraught, distressed, suffering trauma. They've been married from the age of sort of 15, 16, even younger. And they've come to the realization that Islam is a false religion, actually. And they're pleading with this podcaster to get them out of Pakistan and other Muslim countries. It is a desperate situation for ex-Muslims. And we did, at the beginning, you eloquently mentioned about our friend there, that Al-Qaradawi, and he let the cat out of the bag, didn't he, actually? But somebody described them as Islamic patties. They just they just come out with it, and they just let out all their secrets. And anyway, but
I find them very refreshing. Like the ones that we call radical, like ISIS. They're refreshing because they don't lie and they'll just tell you up front, yeah, you're our enemy. We're supposed to hate you, et cetera, et cetera. I actually like those more than the Oxford Union crowd.
No, I totally agree with you. At least you know where they're coming from and
Exactly.
where you stand with them, actually, and it reminds you of the Bush when he was spreading his message of Islam and peace. And was it the Taliban that turned around and said, if I paraphrase it, where the heck is he coming from? Who told him about Islam is a religion of peace, so to speak? And so this is the madness of the West. Why can't they just speak plain English? Why do they speak with forked tongue and just get on with it and say, look?
Or when Erdogan of Turkey famously said, and I agree with him, he said there is no moderate or radical Islam. Islam.
Islam is Islam, basically echoing what the Taliban had said sort of a decade or two before. So,
and who's telling us about moderate Islam? It's Western people. It's just okay. I have a question here, which is I'm going to read it. It's for let me read it real quick, and I'm going to elaborate on it. Panaski, no offense to Mr. Petrie, but who's going to enforce those rights and protections? UN law avails to nothing, sadly. In your defense, I saw this comment come in before you actually did make that point, which is the UN is failing. And it's to that end that I'd like to just basically say I think what we're reaching here is Islam, and it's doing what it's doing, what it's always been doing, and it's obvious about it. So the real problem is whether it's the UN, whether it's the British government, why are they enabling and covering up for this sort of thing? And it's becoming, as Nissar was saying, maddening, and one wants to pull their hair out because it's so obvious. Like you said, this genocide business, why don't they approach those 11 nations? They have an actual, that's what they're supposed to be doing, right? The UN is supposed to be concerned about genocide. So whether it's the British government, the UN, or various other Western governments, including, the point is, what I'm trying to say is the real problem now is no longer, in my opinion, even Islam. Because Islam is Islam and it can be dealt with, and the West is actually still militarily, economically technologically more powerful. It can do
Yes.
whatever. But the problem is, it's not even a lack of will. It's just the will is geared into sabotaging itself, the West. I don't know if you agree with that or if you have any response to it.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, I think there are many forces that, as I said, don't like Britain, but it's not just us, is it? It's across the West, it's Europe, and that they basically is people who can suborn and corrupt the political class. You see, and so they've created these multinational organisations, and they want to run everything through that. And if they have to destroy us along the way, so that they can maintain their control globally.
So then is it at this point then, is it safe to say that, let's stick with Britain, that the British people's real ultimate immediate problem is their government and their leaders and their politicians?
Yeah, well, undoubtedly. Look, this is the complicity issue that you've got the genocide cases against those 11 states, but there are complicity in Article 3 for the Genocide Convention. It makes clear that those who are complicit, like you had in Rwanda, and you had all the guys talking about the cockroaches and all the rest of it on the radio. So they were done for complicity. But you've got this, in the UK, Sharia councils. If they believe they're living in Dar al Harb, what's a Sharia council going to be doing in our country when war is deception? Under their military thinking, and the Sharia jurists are the leaders and the guardians of these statutes. They are there to expand Islam. If you pick up your law manual, it'll tell you the caliph's duty is every year to go out and expand the borders of Islam at the cost of the Dar al Harb, bring them into Dar al Islam. I've read this 3 times. I read this stuff because I want to know what's going on. That was my job in the past. I used to be studying the Soviet Union or, terrorist organizations. But now, I study the law codes that advances the cause of these people who wish to kill Nissar and anyone like him, not only in Britain, but anywhere in the world. They're going to find them based on these law codes. And those law codes are the foundation of the faith. Because it pulls together, as you know, you've got the Quranic issues in there, you've got the Hadith in there, you've got the Sunnah and the example of Muhammad. So it is the roundup of Islam. So that's why they call it the foundation. So, and Britain, it's unacceptable here in the long run. That's the reality. Well, it's never really acceptable at all. But, once people understand it's going to kill you for leaving the religion, and that is the way we demonstrate to our political class, because if they ignore that, they continue to ignore it, should I say, then the complicity issue is about complicity charges for genocide against those people making excuses and allowing this to continue. They cannot, and the British people are completely hacked off. 90% at least, I would imagine now. Even the old left, are looking at it and going, why? I've been staying in an area that was all Labour in the past. It completely flipped. All Reform. It went from I know councils around here that went from 57 Labour councillors out of 63 or 56. It's now 57 Reform. Complete flip. So it's gone from, this, they've died in the wool, Labour, they'll never change. Oh no, they flipped in a day, when they started to wake up to the rape gangs, they started to wake up to the boats and the government doing nothing. So, they've got to be treading very carefully because, charges could follow in the future on complicity with this genocide issue for government officials. As I said, I started looking at this a long time ago. So they were Tories, and they were working hand in glove with the Lib Dems. So none of them have got clean hands, none of them. And the rape gangs and Nissar's life, back in 96 he converted and he's had these problems since then. We're going back that far. So all of these people need to start thinking very carefully about what the future might hold if they carry on down this path the way we're going. Okay? And, these are charges. This is, they use lawfare. Well, that's what's happening here, basically, is that there's because even before you get, for instance, this is an important one, I believe now, Raymond, you have the genocide case, take your years, takes money or whatever. However, what about, we've got all this duty of care all the time. Or is it when you put the plug in the thing? Have you got it wired up properly? And have you got a little sign over it so children don't stick their fingers in or whatever it is? But what about for if you convert to Islam? Were you told that people like Nissar, he got attacked, and that it means death if you leave Islam. So if you convert to marry somebody, and then you think, well, I got divorced and I don't want to stay a Muslim anymore. Oh, hang on a minute. Were you warned beforehand? Doesn't our government have a duty of care, for instance, to warn anyone who's converting in this country that Islam will demand your death if you leave it? I think that's a very straightforward legal issue. They put labels on anything because it's glass and it might shatter, whatever it might be. But what about you might get killed for just changing your faith? I think there's a duty of care issue there, don't you, Raymond?
Yeah, I do. Okay, Neil and Nissar, we've gone on for a bit, and I appreciate your time. So I'd like now to just get any concluding thoughts or whatever last things you'd like to say. Nissar?
Yeah, actually, Neil's mentioned lawfare. I don't mind reporting some good news. So just fairly recently, I have had funding to take the matter against the failure to protect me and my family against the state. So this is actually fairly recent. So the funding has already been put towards the particular firm of solicitors. And it will give me no greater pleasure than one day for the state to, actually say, yeah, we failed you, actually, and there will be some accountability. And the reason for that, it's obviously, I'm not implying it's retribution, but certainly we are and have been, as a family, myself especially, been standing and putting ourselves out there because we care for ex-Muslims, and Islam has no right. Okay, I'd never subscribed to Sharia growing up as a Muslim, never knew what it was. They simply have no right to try to subjugate. Well, we have been subjugated. I've resisted with all my might, and it's almost cost me my life. And we had to flee because we thought we're not going to survive the second time around. But again, rather than tackle this, just like the mass rapes of English girls and working class backgrounds, it is a quite an appalling scenario, actually. And so I stand actually because I do not want to see this country go further down the pan and be subjugated, because this is what is happening. Sharia is running rampant, and these weak-willed politicians, are not standing up for the British people. And of course, British people now are also eyes wide open. They're getting it now. They're understanding, and I believe it's the same scenario when we were in the States. Actually, when we had the news about the Prohibition 10, the referendum whether to allow or to cancel Sharia, 95% of Texans voted overwhelmingly to ban Sharia. Would that be right? Would that be fair comment, Raymond?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah. And so if they can't reform, they need to conform, and that is conform as we did growing up to English values, English law system. Actually, they have their mosques, they have religious freedoms, as you quite rightly alluded to, actually, that this country, Great Britain, pushed out religious freedoms in the four corners of the world, actually. But they've seemed to have forgotten their place. And so they need to get back to where they were and actually start now speaking out and really resist Sharia while they can. Honestly, and the same goes for the states. I really can't shout it out enough, actually. And so I really hope this will. This is another way and means of expressing to your viewers, Raymond, actually, that it is a very, very serious situation indeed in the West.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Nissar. And Neil, we got a few minutes left. Any last thoughts?
Right, look, World War II, the Nazis ran Germany and there was a disaster. But we don't go around blaming all the young Germans today for what happened then. All right. So, and the same goes for any country in the world. You move on and the children are not guilty. Okay. So when they're trying to make all of these people feel guilty across the West, because it's not just Britain, across the West, it's all tripe. It's all designed to keep you under the thumb. Every single one of us, so that a group at the top who want this global type, amorphous government that they will control, the end of religions, all the rest of it, they want us all battling each other to their own powerful ends. That's what it's about. That is definitely the case. Happy to state it. And, this is not a conspiracy theory. You can go back and if you read my book, you'll see how I justify what I'm saying here quite clearly as an intelligence guy and analyze a lot of stuff. So the West is under attack completely. And, part of that is to bring in Islam into Europe. That needs dealt with by they either reform, or if they can't reform their laws, then we don't want any Sharia councils. We don't want any Sharia jurists. We don't want anyone who's supporting those people remaining across the West. Us is going to be easier to do in America because you've got a lower population at the moment of them. We're going to be tougher in Europe. However, we had something similar. We had problems with our, threats of violence back in the 1800s through a particular group, and we created what was called the enrolled, the enrolled pensioners. These were ex-military who would support the police in the 1840s. This was so they were enrolled. We may have to do the same again. We've done it before. So if someone wants to try and kick off in this country, then, a lot of veterans could be recalled. They didn't spend a lot of time on this because they were already well trained, but they were available, a bit like a volunteer fire force, I suppose, firemen. And they could be called out and they would then help deal with any issues that arose in terms of violence. So they could have hundreds of thousands of those guys pretty rapidly. So we have to look at where we stand as a nation and across Europe and the United States. But, we should not be knocking ourselves apart. And people are waking up to this. As I said to you, across these areas, I'm seeing it. So the wake up is happening late in the day, but it's usually late in the day. I remember someone telling me the funny story about, during the Blitz when the bombs were coming down and someone said to his nanny, said, "Nanny, when did you know we were at war?" And she says, "When the bomb landed in the back garden," and prior to that, people, they don't think about these things too closely, but
Right.
Eventually it hits home, and that's where we're heading towards now. And this government, not just ours, but across Europe, they need to wake up to the fact that people do not appreciate be putting into this corner. And you're seeing it now in America with things like Fauci's, issues and the COVID thing. Justice is coming for these people, and it'll be coming for those who have been complicit in what is happening across Europe with Islam as well.
Yeah.
No, that day will come. So,
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, Neil and Nissar, thanks very much. I know it's very late in the UK right now, so thanks for joining me and sharing these thoughts. And unfortunately, because apostasy is such a major issue, I'm sure we'll be speaking again somewhere down the line. So
thank you,
take
Raymond.
care. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Sure. Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Yes. Okay. Good night to you both. Okay, everyone. So there it is. The apostasy, like I said at the beginning, one of the most important and actually fundamental issues dealing with at the heart of the Islam question that we're dealing with, because it's what sustains Islam, right? You heard it in the beginning, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi basically saying that if apostasy didn't exist, Islam would have died, and that's absolutely true. So let me now quickly just go through some of these super chats, and we will call it a night. Okay. Scarlet Rose, please share a bit regarding the short with you and the owl. Okay, that was in Transylvania, and I have a lot more footage actually, which I'm hoping to put together and publish. But that was in Saint Anna, Transylvania, at a Tushfanyos festival, which was very nice. And I was hiking at that lake, Saint Anna, and I believe that's what it's called. And I came across a man with an owl. And long story short, he let me put it on my arm. Okay. 98 Red Thunder. You the man. You mean, I'm sure you mean Nissar and Neil, but I'll take it too. Thank you. Lies destroy lives. I'm going to share the hell out of this live stream, as you should. Lies destroy lives. A religion that convinces evil people they are good. Yeah, that's definitely one way to put it. Raymond, Brother Rashid receives lots of death threats. You wrote some positive things about his book, The Ideology Behind Islamic Terrorism. Have you considered interviewing him about that book? Sure. That's actually a good idea. I know Brother Rashid pretty well. Former Muslim turned Christian. He has a pretty popular show in Arabic, and I think he also does shows in English. But yeah, that's a good idea. Deus Vult Club, the UK is doomed if people do not wake up fast. Agreed. Terraloft. Unk alert. Is that about me and something about technology? I'll let it pass. Okay. Panoski. No offense to Mr. Petrie. Yeah, we read that one and we responded to it. Lies destroy lives. The problem is the church. The problem in the church is a theological problem. A weak Christianity will not save the West. Thank you, Raymond, for encouraging Christians to read unspoken sermons. Yes, I agree. Unspoken sermons by George MacDonald, great theologian and very insightful and edifying stuff. Lies destroy lives. Even though listening to all these awful things tests my patience, I'd rather know than not know. Thanks for pissing us all off, Raymond. Well, you're welcome. I live to do that. Their fear of death enslaves them. It's just too risky to criticize Islam or protect those who do. Yeah, that's Islam begins and ends around fear, unfortunately. Good point. Informed consent for apostasy. And the last one. Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining me. And until next time, take care and see you then. Bye.